Welcome to the CSBP Fertilisers Grow Better podcast, sharing knowledge with growers on leading crop nutrition, sustainable agriculture and other issues impacting the agricultural industry.
G'day everyone, welcome to the CSBP Grow Better podcast. I'm Johnston and I'm joined today by CSBP Senior Agronomist James Easton. G'day James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Grace. Fantastic to be here.
Now James, we're going to talk today about the opportunities growers have for plant testing and taking all the opportunity out there this season. But before we get stuck into that, tell us about yourself and your role at CSBP. How did you come to the company and what's your history?
A little bit of history there, Gray. I've been here just over 30 years, so I came out of university a long time ago now, and look, I've been here, as I said, for just over 30 years. I'm obviously here because I enjoy what I do, and I obviously think a lot of the company, and it's been a great journey for us. Yeah,
it's really wonderful. And so, in your role as senior agronomist, what do you get up to day to day?
Day to day, it's really about supporting our people in the field, I think, and others within the business. So, it's getting across the things that we need to know about so that we can give better advice to growers and better support to our customers. So I spend a lot of time looking at trials, other people's research, just what's going on around the place, because really we need to be across the opportunities to give better advice. So yeah, that's what I do, and I talk a lot to our people, and I talk to the consultants and other agronomists around the place, and I enjoy all that. So
it's really, really great to have you on board, and great to have you joining us today. We're talking about plant sampling in particular, and we're recording this at the end of May, expecting that it's going to be a really great opportunity soon for growers to plant sample. Can you just give us the basics? Tell us about what plant sampling is and why is it of importance for growers?
Well, it's just such an underutilised thing we do. You know, we do a lot of soil testing, and soil testing is great for understanding where things are at in our soils and what the supply is like. But at the end of the day, it's what gets into the plants. Whether it be crops or pastures, which really, really matters, So this year we've had a great start to the season, really positive. It was a bit dry in some areas to start with, but rains have come through and things are away to a flying start. And talking to a few of the guys out in the field, and girls too, of course, things are at least as good as what they were at this time last year, And I look, there's a long way to go for sure, but certainly the start's been fantastic. Luigi Moreschi, one of our northern people who's also been around 30 years plus, I think, and he was saying he thought that a lot of crops are a week ahead of where they were this time last year, and early wheat, 3 to 4 leaf already. I think most of the state's looking really good. So that's all positive.
Yeah, it's really great. So when should, for different crops, growers be taking the opportunity to plant sample, and what are the things they should be looking for, or what are the triggers that would say, hey, this might be a good idea?
We can use plant testing for a whole range of purposes, but I think, just to get a bit of a check on how things are progressing. So, fertiliser's obviously gone up a lot, but so have grain prices too. So, the opportunity for much more profitable returns there, particularly with canola. But with the high price of fert, there is more risk of lost profit if we get it wrong. So I think it's as much about ensuring we're targeting our inputs, particularly nitrogen now, in the right areas, and maybe not using it where we don't need it. Doesn't make sense, obviously, but there'll be opportunities out there where crops will be looking for more nitrogen, as an example. So as a monitoring tool, maybe going back to soil testing sites which have been identified and sampled. A lot of farmers now using Decipher Ag for selecting sites and seeing where things are at. But also, look, if there are crops out there which aren't looking quite like they might be expected to look, sampling some of those crops with comparison, better areas to get it, that can help us understand where there might be issues. So I think this time of the year there's a lot of nitrogen still to go out and plan to go out. Some of the early results I've seen from the south coast last year, there's crops down there which haven't had a lot of canola crops with a lot of potential, which have got, to my mind, they've already got enough. So there's and I know farmers, a couple of those growers were planning to spend a lot more on N, but perhaps some of that nitrogen might be better off spent in other paddocks. These paddocks I'm talking about are coming off really productive pastures, well fertilised pastures. They've grown a lot of nitrogen, but I've looked at some other results from the Central District, and there's canola coming through already deficient in N. So it's not just all about N. And that's the other reason I think we could be doing more testing. It's not just shuffling the nitrogen around. And it's a really good guide for nitrogen decisions, I believe. It's one thing about being here so long. I've seen a lot of trials, and we plant test all our trials, and it really does give you a lot of confidence with the numbers and the interpretations. But other nutrients like potassium, potassium's a nutrient I still don't think people really appreciate that crops and pastures take up nearly as much potassium as nitrogen. So, we once had really good reserves. They're getting run down, and we're seeing more and more deficiencies. So, and with plant testing too, I think I've got more confidence around what the results tell us. Soil testing's useful as a guide, but as I said before, plant testing really shows us where the crops and pastures are getting what they should be. So, potassium deficient crops won't respond too well to nitrogen. So, if we're getting half the response, that nitrogen's pretty much twice expensive. So that's pretty horrific when you think about it.
So you can pick up that potassium deficiency with a plant test?
Yep. It's really gives us a really good idea on it's a really good gauge on how crops are going, and pastures too. So and there's still plenty of time to, if results come back deficient, there's plenty of time to get out there with the crops. I'm not even into June yet, so deficient crops will respond to potash. They may well need N and possibly S as well, so there's NKS products we can use to address those deficiencies. Pastures will respond very well to potash right the way through, through to early spring, but good opportunity to get out there over the next month, 6 weeks, and get a handle on where things are at.
So if a grower was trying to think around where or which sites they should be thinking about plant testing, you talked about picking sites where you might have already done a soil test and you can maybe compare the results. Mm-hmm. Is there some visual cues, or are there some other ways people should be thinking around how they should choose what to plant test? Or is it also about thinking about the paddocks that you might want to be applying a top-up application to?
Yeah.
What's the thought criteria I should be going through?
All of those things, Gray. I mean, it's I guess those paddocks where you really, maybe those, particularly canola, I think, where you're planning to put a lot of nitrogen on, just to fine-tune those applications. Where paddocks have been a bit maybe underperforming in the past and not really producing what might have been hoped for, and that could be an early sign that things aren't quite right. It's not just the amount of nutrients we're applying, it's also getting the balance right. So we might need sulphur with that nitrogen, we might need potassium with the nitrogen. So
and that's the kind of thing you can pick up with a plant test?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They're all major nutrients, and they're all very important. And it's not just the major nutrients. The other big ones, the trace elements. That's soil testing. It's a pretty rough guide for copper and zinc, but plant testing really, again, because we're only looking for micro amounts of these elements, the plant test results are give us a much better idea of how things are tracking. And there's been a lot of lime been applied in the last 10 to 20 years. There's a lot of paddocks out there with 8 to 10 tonnes of lime or more. And lime, one thing lime does, it affects the availability of nutrients. So it can be a really positive thing for things like phosphorus and maybe nitrogen, but other nutrients like copper, zinc, particularly manganese, the availability is much reduced with liming. So we're seeing more manganese deficiencies in crops and pastures where lime's gone on. That's not to say we shouldn't be liming, but if we are liming, we've got to be careful that we're not over liming, and or where we see a need, are we using the best fertiliser at seeding time? So that can help us with decisions for next year. Products with manganese in them, we've got a big range there, but also this year, we can get back with manganese sprays and address those deficiencies. I should say with the trace elements too, a lot of growers are using them with their products, the extra type products.
At seeding, or? At
seeding time, and there's a lot of growers do put foliars out as a matter of course, but I think we still need to check those things are doing the job. Are we getting enough on? Are we putting it on in a form that's effective? With the foliar applications, are we putting enough on? Are we using the right product? So even though we're applying nutrients, and that goes with potassium too, a lot of growers still use potassium. I think rates have come back a bit this year with the high prices. We just need to be careful not cutting back in the wrong areas, and And with trace elements in particular, we need to be careful that we're not underdoing them where we need them.
And there's reasons to do them, it sounds like, both for making decisions this year and then for reviewing really how your plants, reviewing your longer term program and how things are going over the longer term.
That's right. That's often an oversight. People think, oh, it's too late to do anything about it this year, but for mine, plant testing is as good a guide as to what we should be planning for next year. So we use soil testing for that too, but as I said before, it's the plant testing which really gives us that feedback on, whether we've got the balance of nutrients right, whether we're putting on enough potash, whether the trace element strategy is right, are we using enough phosphorus, all those things. Yeah.
So at CSBP, we hear a lot about the 30-33 rule for soil testing. Do we have a similar, what's your recommendation for how much plant testing people should be doing?
If you've got those sites already soil tested on that sort of basis, go back to some of those sites and see how the nutrition's been reflected.
Now? What stage of the season do you go back and take a sample?
With canola, we advise from 5 to 6 leaf onwards. Probably, we don't want to be leaving it too long. When the crops get big, it gets difficult to get too many plants into the sample bag. So ideally, we want to be doing 10 plants per sample, at least 5 at least anyway. So canola can really just burst away with the growth rates. Not too long down the track. With the cereals, ideally 2 to 3 tillers onwards, and ideally prior to early stemming elongation. So most cereal crops are just, they're nowhere quite near that growth stage just yet. Some of the earlier crops are. There's a sort of a sweet spot, if you like. It might be between 5 and 7, 8 weeks after emergence up north, and more like maybe 6 to 10 weeks in some of the southern areas. So. And that gives us time to go back and redress deficiencies in season and give us a good idea on whether we're on the right track or not too. But the symptoms, I think again, there are people thinking that we can keep an eye out, things look fine, there's no issues. We can lose yield without symptoms. Things like copper deficiencies, they can cost us 50-80% yield.
Wow.
And we don't. We rarely see it in the crops during the growing season. So they can be missed and they can be blamed on things like frost or other conditions. So we just got to be careful with relying too heavily on symptoms. I think it's good to look at the crops and it's a good backup, but the other thing is too, we can misdiagnose deficiencies. Just as I said before, with the high fertiliser prices, if your plant testing's costing $1.02 per hectare and we're spending $100 or $200 per hectare on fertiliser, tell me it just makes sense, and to be basing fertiliser decisions on gut feel or just how the crop looks, I just think it's a lot more risk than what we should be taking with the investment we've got in the crops out there.
So hopefully you've sold everyone out there on the benefits. What do you do then? If someone says, James, you got me, I want a plant test, what are the steps that someone should actually take now?
We've got a big team out there, and they are really keen to support our growers, obviously. The account managers, so they're all over the state. I think most growers would know who they are. If they don't, pick up the phone and ring somebody they do know within the business to have a chat. They can assist greatly with planning, sampling sites. I'm sure all of them are keen to get onto farm. And talk to them, and they, we're training them up right now, and refreshing them on how to go about collecting samples and interpreting the results, and the likes of myself and others within the agronomy team are behind them. So we're there to help and support and just do what we can do to really help our customers get the best advice.
And you talked about interpretation there. So if a grower does do a plant sample and it goes through the lab, what's the process after that to get the results?
The account managers, they know when the samples have hit the lab, they get emails, they know when the results are ready, okay? And then they'll get in touch with the growers soon thereafter. Yep. The turnaround times through the lab, they're pretty quick, And
the account manager team helps with some interpretation?
I'm sure most know we've got NUlogic, that's the platform we use. So NUlogic interprets the results, takes into account a whole range of factors, including plant age, growth stage, the supply of other nutrients, all those things, and then the account manager can use their local expertise to interpret the results, which they'll be taking account of things like when the crop was sown, yield potential, just how things have established and how things are looking. You know, they've got the local knowledge, they know how the season's tracking in their area, so they understand the risks, or they can have the conversation with their growers about the risks involved. But you know, certainly the returns are there still with the high prices, grain prices, if we use it, you know, where we need it.
Sounds like plant sampling a really great option for people who might be thinking around optimising their program this season and optimising their program for the longer term as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so, James, I guess while we've got you, you mentioned before that you see the season shaping up pretty well. Any other reflections you've got on what you've seen so far, or the carryover from the big year last year?
Yeah, well, you know, obviously last year was a big year. I think it was exceeded our previous record by 30% for grain production around the state. So a lot of nutrients have gone out the gate. So that's something we'll need to watch. With the early start this year, good early rains, fantastic growing conditions, and I should say too, ideal conditions to be sampling crops. You know, if you're sampling a crop that's growing well, you're getting a really good reflection of what's there. No doubt, mineralisation rates are up on what they might be with a later break to the season. Crops are bursting away, so with that good root development, you know, they are looking for those nutrients. So, yeah, there's a lot of potential. Canola particularly, I think around the state, the cereal crops, a lot of them are still just coming out of the ground or just getting finished up now with the seeding program. So there's always risk. I think for mine, it's all about, you know, getting the odds in our favour, and, you know, the more we can test our crops and soils and you know, there's a lot we can do to get the odds more in our favour than not. So there's some things we can't control, there's things we can control. So it's controlling the controllables, as they say. Yeah.
And you spoke to the, let me get this right, the Australian Association of Agronomic Consultants, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
On Friday, what was the tenor of that discussion? And I think you attended their PD day for the day.
Yeah, it was at AAAC, the Association of Agricultural Consultants. I went along with Rusty, our supply manager, and Rusty gave a good rundown on where we are with markets and the volatility we're trying to manage at the moment as a business and with our customers. And I spoke a little bit about, you know, the things I've spoken about today. So yeah, try to G them up a bit on the opportunities with, you know, getting out and testing crops and pastures, and just the opportunities for, you know, much more profitable returns, but also the risks with, you know, the risk of getting it wrong or spending money in the wrong areas. So the importance of plant testing and yeah, just using the tools we've got to make better decisions.
Very positive. All right. Well, we'll look forward to a bounty of samples coming through the CSBP lab, and firstly after all the good word getting out there from the consultants, and secondly after everyone hearing you on the show today. So thank you very much, James, for joining us. Some really great messages there around getting out in the paddock, great conditions for plant sampling. Find out what you know, control the controllables, and talk to your account manager if you need a hand getting some plant sampling kits or getting some plant samples done or interpreting those results. Yeah. Thanks, James. That's it for us today on the CSBP Grow Better podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Slide into our DMs if you've got any feedback. We're at CSBP Fertilisers on all your favourite social media platforms. And we look forward to seeing you next time. I've been Gray Johnston. Thanks for joining us on the CSBP Grow Better podcast. Cheers. Goodbye. Thanks, James.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the CSBP Grow Better podcast. For more information about CSBP, please visit csbp-fertilisers.com.au or connect with us on social media at CSBP Fertilisers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn.